Are you familiar with the work of John Vervaeke?
Yeah, John and I have actually had a couple of calls together as well.
Cool. Yeah, because you mentioned Neoplatonism, but you didn't mention him in that list. Uh, a lot of
Oh, yeah, 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 for sure. Add him.
mhm.
Alexander, do you want to pop in your question there?
Um, Hi, Jamie. It's Alex here from Cape Town. Yeah, all the questions that I had have been ended up of a field of dead cows. um, it's so what's still left out of what I really wanted to ask you is, you know, talking about John Vervaeke's work, where he he discusses a lot of psychotechnologies, and he is kind of speaking a lot about them being put together into an ecology of practices. And I think I'm still trying to figure out what that actually looks like. And I think, you know, if I see your work, and I've been watching you over quite a long period of time, you know, I think ever since your talk at Venice Beach, that TEDx talk, I've seen how things have changed quite a bit. But I've also seen in your more recent work, in that talk with the sacred plant medicine talk, where you, together with John Vervaeke's work, there seems like an amazing ecology of practices forming there, but I still can't see what that actually looks like for the individual and in groups like this, but also practices for the individual that help one grow through through what we've just been talking about, growing up, actually.
Yeah. Well, quick question. Let's just do a time check. How long do I have to answer this question?
We have no rules, as long as you want. Did
Okay.
we book for 2 hours? Or I guess I can just ask Jamie.
I don't know what we did. Let me just make sure I don't have anything else coming up. Yeah. Okay. So I'm for sure good to answer this question.
Okay.
Okay. So Alexander, beautiful framing. Thank you. And I mean, what I'm hearing you is like, is there a secret sauce? Is there a protocol for self-initiating into anthropos, like homegrown humans, like the integrated homoplasmates, as PKD would have called them? And the short answer is yeah, fuck yeah. There absolutely is, and it's what we would call the hedonic yoga of becoming. And it's based on, I mean, basically, if you pursue basically the intersection of kind of cutting edge neuroscience and optimal psychology, you know, as it equates into biohacking, like that neck of the woods, if you pursue it open-mindedly and without flinching or being squeamish, it ends up in a psychosexual tantra. It just does. And if you go through all the wisdom traditions, they all did too. Right? There's not an esoteric tradition out there that under enough rugs you don't get to sex magic. And the reason for that is because, as John Lilly discovered back in the 50s, right, is that the human ecstatic nervous system maps one-to-one with the sexual arousal network because evolution is efficient. And if you think of the fact that we, for millions of years, have managed to reproduce with no instruction manual, would suggest that there's insane amounts of very, very strong evolutionary biological encoders to precipitate and enforce and encourage those acts, along with respiration, right? That respiration is another one that is massively, imprinted in our systems. Now, good news, bad news, the majority of human suffering is to do with our sexuality. Rape, trauma, incest, unwanted children, you name it. Like if you just get under the hood of human dis-ease and trauma and suffering, I mean, majorities derive from that. So on the one hand, huge amounts of grief around us being pulled by the puppet strings of our biological encoding, but also massive potential if you can isolate it from the amoral evolutionary impulse, doesn't give a fuck who we fuck. All it cares about is the viability of gene pools. So never mind our social norms and custom, never mind our relational preferences and contracts, never mind any of it, right? Evolution just wants robust genetic propagation. But if you can judo that move and use that as a base layer in a hedonic yoga of becoming, which is basically saying, how can I harness and precipitate neurophysiological ecstatic experience, right, in service of trauma relief, defragmentation, and integration, such that my nervous system and my psychology and my relationships can all continue to become increasingly stable, anti-fragile, clarified, and high bandwidth. Then what might that do as far as a path of human becoming? So if so the end game, I mean, I don't think we have time to map it fully, but if you can basically picture where you just kitchen sink the living fuck out of all of it, you're like, okay, so have a special friend, because you need a consenting partner. You can do, there's for sure solo versions of this kind of practice, but having a practice partner is just more. It's more effective, it's more able, it's more meaningful, it's those kinds of things. But if you basically said, okay, what does a sexual yoga look like? It looks like Thai massage, deep body work, somatics. It looks like breath work. It looks like fascial openings. I mean, but this is basically becoming Vitruvian human, right? So you're doing all of it. There's no skipping steps. It's breath work to precipitate parasympathetic arousal. It's vagal nerve stimulation. It's stacking endorphins, dopamine, et cetera. It's also shamanic psychedelics. So basically, if you just said, hey, we're going to light the candles, put on super vibey music, have your special friend, and engage in extended body work, psychedelic journeying, breath work, and cultivated orgasmic release with eye tracking, tongue movements, tremor release, spinal undulation, pelvic mobility, right? And all these things. And basically you cultivate orgasmic energy, time and coordinate it with music, with breath work, and with all the other stacks, pulse it through the system, light up the human nervous system such that you both have access to the Neoplatonic ideal realms. So ideation, cognition, sense making, pattern recognition, even direct inspiration is maxed. At the same time that you're getting information on, here are the blockings in my nervous system and my physiology. And so the energy of the peak state, orgasmic release, can both inspire and inform, like, oh shit, anamnesis, didn't know that, didn't remember that, now I do remember it. But also like an electrician putting voltage through a circuit and being like, here's a crimped wire, here's a blown fuse. I now have information as to where my blockages are. And I also temporarily have energy to rework or reformat my neurophysiology and even my memories. Then you're in an interesting place. And that's congruent with what MAPS is doing with PTSD research on MDMA. They're like, hey, you're high prolactin, high vasopressin, high oxytocin. You're in a state of satiated safety and belonging. And, Rick Doblin, their founder, has said, memories we think of are like scrapbooks we take off a shelf, we look at, we put back on the shelf. And he's like, that's not it at all. What we actually do is we take them out, we look at them, we rewrite them, and we put them back on the shelf. So you can then engage in retroactive, imaginally layered trauma relief, where you can go back to your own life and you can reformat in that state, right, of enoughness and belonging. And the other thing is that when he correlated that prolactin, vasopressin, oxytocin physiological profile of MDMA trauma, patients, he said the closest we have is to the post-orgasmic state. And you're like, okay, well, you can go schedule 1, 30 years, really fucking hard, highly controlled, or how else could we get people to a post-orgasmic state? Let's see. And Nicole Prousey at the Kinsey Institute is actually doing research on exactly that, on actually validating women's orgasm as prescription pharmaceutical, right, as a replacement for drugs with side effects and all that kind of stuff. So as soon as you kind of get in this neck of the woods, you're like, oh, that's probably the most compact, high leverage, open source, scalable stack of modalities that we can combine to effectively discharge both historic biographical trauma, meaning I've taken some hits that I still have in my system and I haven't been able to get out. They impinge how I move and how I am in my life, as well as real time. So ideally, we try to get to the present. We try to metabolize our past grief to get to the deep now in our bodies, in our minds, and in our whatever we would want to call post-conventional experience and selfhood. And then, can I do my level best to stay here? And if I can be sourcing from the deep now, right, that arguably would be the Kairos Chronos crossroads. And if I can then have a recurring practice, daily practice, weekly practice, monthly, seasonal, annual, where I know I can catch myself, where I know I can experience anamnesis, the forgetting of the forgetting, the remembering of true nature, true purpose, essence of being, then, and this is critical, then I'm free. Then I'm free to play full out. So instead of having a peak experience, having a breakthrough experience, going into the world naively thinking I'm going to change it, but it really just kicks the shit out of me. People just don't play fair and the world doesn't want to change. And then I subtly end up with this subject-object duality again of like, I'm pure or trying to stay loving and groovy and the world sucks and fuck the haters. Or when's my next retreat? Or when's my next float tank? Or I need to do twice as much meditation, or what have I heard about ketamine therapy, or whatever, right? Any seeking that this moment isn't enough, right? I've created a prophylactic relationship. I'm trying to protect myself from a dirty world. So it's crypto-puritanism. That's problematic for most people on the spiritual growth path. They're forever washing themselves clean, thinking they're going to fix things, and then getting hammered, and then subtly resenting or resisting the world as it is. But if you have a recurring hedonic engineering practice that's periodized, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal, annual, and you have to test this to the point where somatically you trust that shit's going to boot me up. Like all I got to do is drag my broke ass to the doorstep of the temple and I will be remade and remembered, literally. Then you fucking lean into your dismembering. You're like, let me just do a swan dive into the swamp. It doesn't matter how dirty I get, because I know I can go down to the river to pray, right, and be washed clean again. And so that is a fundamental shift in how we show up in that sort of nominal bodhisattvic vow, right, which is fuck it, right? Like let me lean in, let me look for hand grenades to dive on, rather than trying to preserve or protect myself for a later date. And then I think we have, and then we're not seeking, back to the utopian escape hatch, we're not seeking or banking on some redemptive eschaton. We're showing up fully realized in this lifetime, in this moment, as it is, as anthropos, which is not that, hey, there's hyperspace and multidimensional machine elves, or there's baby Jesus, or there's anaconda spirit or guardian angels or whatever the fuck. It's saying, hey, the miracle isn't that we're starlight dressed up as matter. The miracle is that momentarily, for a handful of decades, we're Homo sapiens with prefrontal cortexes and spinal columns and erogenous zones and opposable thumbs. Holy fuck, that's amazing. This is the amazing part. This is the miracle. The timeless numinous is table stakes. And so that's that esoteric notion of being a twice born human. Is that we come back to that remembering and we act from this place as if this is the miracle, not the other way around.
Wow.
Which
sorry,
fucking
David.
hurts, by the way. I mean, truth in advertising, getting to that, it costs, is T.S. Eliot, right? Costs not less than everything. But once you're there, there's nothing that can be lost.